Frank's still with us, James Olley joining us now. I want to talk more about the situation at Chelsea, if we can, James, and how this civil war, if we can call it that, between Todd Burley and Behdad Eghbali actually began, and if sacking Pochettino was the main instigator here.
Well, no. I mean, you have to go back really to the start, right to the beginning, when obviously this wasn't a typical takeover. The circumstances around the Roman Abramovich exit from the club was obviously hugely controversial, and it happened very, very quickly. The club was put up for sale effectively in March, and by the end of May, it was sold. And that, you're talking about, it was £2.5 billion at the time, and that is a world record fee for a sports team, for a professional sports team. So this is a massive, massive transaction that took place in a very, very short space of time. And because of that, the bidders involved were doing a lot of it on the fly. And when you think about the consortium that Todd Burley and Clearlake Capital put together, these aren't sort of bedfellows who've been, business partners for a long time, going back decades, and thought, why don't we try our hand at buying a football club? This was very much sort of thrown together, a sense of opportunity. Clearlake Capital, a private investment fund, was the money effectively, and Todd Burley was supposedly a bit of the know-how. He tried to buy Tottenham a couple of years earlier, so he'd done some of his due diligence about the Premier League, and he supposedly understood a little bit more about the game than a private investment fund, Clearlake. And so they came together, bought the club, and tried to move it forward. And I think what we've seen over the last couple of years is a shift away from Todd Burley taking the reins at the start to Clearlake Capital starting to, as the majority shareholder, sort of say, actually, we're not sure we like some of these decisions, and wanting to take more centre stage. So it's kind of a situation that's deteriorated over a period of time. I think the results have not helped that. The Pochettino thing, I think, was a significant factor in that. I remember coming on this show at the time and saying that there was a disagreement at the top of the club about whether they should keep Pochettino. And one of the things that I was trying to allude to there was that Todd Burley effectively wanted to keep him, and Behdad Eghbali and Clearlake wanted to get rid of him. And this is where it had just got to the point this summer where these decisions were starting to be questioned internally, and it was getting to a point where they felt as though they can't really work together anymore. And now we sit here today, and the two parties are looking to options as to whether they can buy each other out.
So what impact is this power struggle going to have on the club, James? Because obviously that's what the fans want to know.
Well, look, I mean, to some extent, it already has had an impact on the club, because when we've talked on this show a lot about the sort of scattergun approach and Chelsea's transfer policy not really making a lot of sense, and they've spent an awful lot of money, 1.2 billion. Yes, some of that has been recouped, but it's looked crazy from the outside. And a lot of that is because of this struggle behind the scenes. So there's a lot of decision makers, a lot of voices going into recruitment. You've got two sporting directors, as we've mentioned. We've got the two sort of key figureheads at the top of the club. You've got a head of recruitment, you've got a head of goalkeeping, you've got a manager, you've got their data analysts. All these people are feeding into these recruitment decisions. And I think what we've seen in this window, and the Raheem Sterling deal kind of links back to this, is that Clearlake have kind of taken the reins a bit now. And what they've tried to do is sort of calm this all down a bit, and they're trying to clear out a lot of the players that they feel are no longer part of the future of Chelsea. And Raheem Sterling is quite significant, because obviously he was the first major signing of this new era. And that was, I think they feel, a sort of a Bowley-led, let's throw a lot of money at this. Let's pay 325 grand a week for a proven Premier League player, whatever he was, 28, 29. Let's get him in. He can hit the ground running straight away. And they've moved now towards trying to sign younger players on lower initial wages on these massive long-term contracts that are incentivised over a long period of time. And I think that the hope is, when we talk about the power struggle and how it will affect things, I think the Clearlake's view is that now this can start to settle down. Because at the end of the day, they've got 61.5% of the shares in the club. They can call all the shots here. They don't have to sell. My information is they don't want to sell. They've got no interest in selling. And so it might just be a case that while Todd Burley has major sign-off over all the decisions, and at the moment he's not vetoed any big transfer, and that is something that could happen down the line if there is a power struggle and the relationship really deteriorates entirely. But for the time being, the hope from the Clearlake side is that that they've sort of won the battle, if you like. Todd Bowley's kind of been marginalised a little bit, and they can just start to settle down and let this team bed in under Enzo Maresca and try and get the results on the pitch.
Oh, Frank, you're our resident actor. Is this all dramatic enough for you?
Losing Sterling?
The whole situation that James was discussing.
No, while James was talking, I was feeling my blood boiling in a way, where I'm really fed up. Those people don't understand anything. They forgot that football was played by human beings and not products. And depending on their form, you can see your share going up or down. But what they created with Chelsea, and not for long, is a real big mess. And you have to understand football to be involved in. And we see so many people getting into that business because it's a business without knowing the purpose of it and how it works. Saying for some executive chief, saying that fans are customers, players are products, that doesn't bring something good for the club. And I'm very worried for Chelsea. Hopefully it's going to get better. I don't know how, but I just pray for it. But really, it's a big mess. I just want to see those people going and maybe somebody good to go. When I came and I signed for Chelsea, my chairman, Ken Bates, was a milk delivery chairman of a company, but he never went into football. He was just a chairman, and he let the good people working on it and making Chelsea better. That's the point. Those people know nothing, but they're completely involved.
Well, they did walk into the odd dressing room or two 5 minutes before kickoff, which was to the surprise of one or two managers. But look, when you have too many cooks in the kitchen, the pots and pans start flying, and that's not a good thing. And as James said, now that you sort of look at this and see the fractured relationship between direction towards direction of the club, then maybe, just maybe, you could understand a little bit the haphazard nature of the recruitment. But I'm giving them a bit of leeway there, a lot of leeway, because even when there's a fractured ownership battle, you should still have some sense of normality about recruitment, which there has not been. However, Chelsea need, like most clubs, like all clubs, a clear direction. And that clear direction is not people fighting at the top with a power struggle. Because that's not going to lead to good, cohesive strategy, which Chelsea have not had. Now, Enzo Maresca's in there at the moment, trying to make the best of it. We'll see if he's the latest to succeed. But that, until they sort this out, and I'm sure they will at some point, but the quicker they sort it out, the better, because when you sit around the boardroom and there's so many discerning voices want to go in different directions, then it is not going to take the club forward. So this is something that needs to be fixed pretty soon, because it's a mess. It's a mess with the amount of money they've spent, the amount of players they've got, the amount of players that are just at the training ground but not wanted. Is a ridiculous thing to be having to deal with. So the quicker these money men sort this out, then this club can start moving forward in a cohesive direction that's going to take them back amongst the elite, which they are not at the moment.
Well, James, we're actually going to quote some of your article on Chelsea's transfer plan, which was titled Wild Spending Spree or Wise Strategy. You say João Felix and Jadon Sancho join a squad blessed with multiple options in wide areas already, including Cole Palmer, Noni Madueke, Mikhailo Mudryk, Pedro Neto and Christopher Nkunku. So which is it, James? Is it wild spending spree or wise strategy?
Well, look, I mean, I'm not here to defend them in the sense of when you look at the wide options, it's pretty crazy that they've stockpiled that number of players. I mean, that part of the piece refers to the fact that only really realistically 2 or 3 of those can play in each game, maybe 4 off the bench, I suppose, in total. And you know, you're just not going to keep that number of wingers happy. I mean, obviously, they'll argue João Felix could play through the middle and Nkunku could play through the middle. Sterling's gone, but you know, they've got options there that can play in different positions. But I just don't think we've reached the end of where they're trying to get to with this squad. I think it's going to take remarkably another window, maybe next summer, before they streamline it and get it into a really efficient shape. But when you look at those options there, you do think, well, how are all of those players going to be kept happy over the course of a season? The Jadon Sancho deal, for example, that was obviously one that was done very late in the window, and I'm told that one was led on data. Their data told them that Jadon Sancho was a better option, a better fit for what they're trying to do than Raheem Sterling. So they went and got him. But you sort of think, well, do you really need him when you've already got all those options as it is? They've got access to more data than any of us can ever imagine. So, they've got the numbers, they feel they can justify it. But really, are those players all going to get the game time that they want over the course of the season? Or are we looking at maybe sitting here in 3 or 4 months' time and thinking, well, maybe Mikhail Mudryk, they spent 89 million on him, if they think, well, actually, we want to move on from him, are they going to try and move him out in January? You can't see João Felix has just signed. Jadon Sancho's on a season-long loan with an obligation to buy next summer. So they've got to make those two part of those plans. Cole Palmer's been fantastic for them, the one shining light, and ironically, the third choice signing in that position. They tried to get 2 other players in Elise and Mohamed Kudus before they went to Cole Palmer. So they've kind of lucked into that one a little bit. So, not all of these players can't play. So you have to look at that list and think, well, at least 1, maybe 2 of those are going to be on, heading to the exit door in January or next summer.
James, I'm sorry, but Kay, I know that's crazy. I don't have many baby datas, I'm not that smart as maybe as a computer, but I could have told you, Sancho, João Felix, I'm not sure many clubs want them. And surprisingly, it's only Chelsea who got them. That's insane. What we see, João Felix until 2031, how come? How come? We have seen him playing. I don't need data for that. I see him playing. And I don't understand half of the signing that we see. And that's, I don't know, those people are just ruining Chelsea Football Club.
One thing I would just pick up on the back of that is just to say that on the contract lengths, I think a point of this that's underplayed that actually could be quite clever is that Chelsea's average wage when this takeover was completed was about 200 grand a week fixed, and it's now down at about 60. So the argument that they're making privately is that, for example, a Mikhail Mudryk signed on massive money, signed on a long-term contract. Now, conventionally, we're all sort of programmed to think, well, he's going to be an absolute integral part of what you do going forward. Otherwise, why would you have committed the money and why would you have signed him? But he's going to be on quite a low wage. And their view is that the salary is always the biggest obstacle to trying to get somebody out of the club. Obviously, they can't take a massive hit on the transfer fee. But the salary, for example, in Sterling's, 325 grand a week, that reduced the options to sell Sterling or move him on to all but a handful of clubs, whereas they're trying to argue that because these contracts are so long, the benefit is that they're on a low weekly wage, and therefore that brings in a club like, for example, a Brighton, a West Ham, an Aston Villa, an Everton maybe, those sides who could afford 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 grand a week for a player that they want to take a chance on who's maybe fallen out of favour at a big club like Chelsea. That would not be possible if they were signed on a 3, 4, 5 year deal on 3 times the money. Now, I'm not saying that's genius, but there is at least a logic to it that you can see that they may be able to move some of these players on in a way that it might not look at first glance.
Here's the weird part to that, and I understand what James is saying, and I get the kind of talking points around it. But on the one hand, you're saying before they take over, the average salary was 200 grand a week. Now it's down to 60, but the squad is twice, 2.5 times as big. So does that factor into those numbers in terms of overall salary as opposed to just average salary? And then while I get the long contracts when you pay big money for players, that especially in this day of profit and sustainability, you can spread out the purchase price over the length of that contract. But while you may not have many people who want to take a Raheem Sterling on 300 grand a week or whatever it is, let's just use Nicholas Jackson as an example. And James quoted West Ham and Everton. Who's going to take him, whatever his salary is? and give him a 9-year contract and see out the balance of that 9-year contract. Now, similarly, I think you run into a logjam in trying to move him on, in trying to get somebody to take on that length of contract. So I think there are two ways to look at this, and of course, we won't know how it all pans out, how successful or detrimental it is for quite some time. But as we sit right now, it just makes absolutely no sense to me. And here's the thing: in terms of running a private equity firm, running some kind of a financial enterprise, their approach makes sense. The approach and the amount of people that they bring in and seeing every single department overseeing every single department of the football club makes sense, because you can play off one branch of the business against the other. But ultimately, this is a football club. We're still talking about 11 young men, young women in the terms of the women's game, running around the pitch and managing those personalities, managing those ups and downs of human beings being effectively your asset. And it makes while it makes perfect sense from a private equity perspective, it makes no sense from a footballing perspective to me. And we just have to see how it kind of plays out.
When you're giving people these long contracts, you're kind of blind faith, thinking that, if somebody's on a 6 or 7 or an 8-year deal on less money than a 3 or 4 year deal, and they're affordable to sort of mid to lower table clubs or somewhere abroad, you're factoring in that these players, of course, will want to go and play. And take a shorter term contract on similar money, because some, and I've come across it, some will just sit on the old stubborn fence and say, well, why would I leave and go and play there on a 3-year deal on 70,000 a week when I can sit here and have a 7-year deal on the same money and be stubborn about it, to the detriment of one's career. But you're going in a little bit blind and thinking that a player will just go, I'll move on. I mean, players, and I know it, players can be stubborn, and players do hold a lot of power, and you can't shift them. A contract is a contract, and we've seen it with some of the big clubs. And I go back to this: when Barcelona they still have their troubles. When Barcelona had their serious financial troubles a couple of years ago, they tried to strong arm a couple of big players out, like Ousmane Dembele and, more importantly, Frankie de Jong. They literally dragged de Jong's name through the mud, and he said, no, I am not being the makeshift here for the problems that you've created. And that is something that you have to take into account.
The only thing I will say to that, in terms of even with the length of contracts, if the weekly salary is lower, and don't ask me why I keep picking on Paul Nicholas Jackson here, but at least you'll be able to loan those players out. It won't be a situation like Raheem Sterling where you loan him out, but you still take I think it's 10 million a year hit that James was talking about. At least with the lower salary, you can get those loans, but that player is still yours. You are still responsible for him. So again, I just think this is still a problem. You're just kicking the can further down the road.
Go ahead, James.
Yeah, I would just to pick up on both really good points. I think the balance sheet argument, it makes sense, and that's why it's being made by a private equity firm, right? Because the guys are right. If you've got a player on an 8-year contract that you've decided you don't want, or you're not sure about, and you want to loan him out, or you can't sell him, then if he goes and plays for a year and he does well, then his asset value is actually quite good, because let's say it's a striker and he scored 10 or 15 goals and he's going to be worth a bit more, and he might go there on a permanent deal, or another club might take a chance on him, and you've protected the value of that player because you've got the 6, 7, 8 years built into the original contract. But again, Craig's right in that this all is predicated upon the idea that every single player will just want to play and will go wherever they can play. And there are players who sit on contracts, and there are players who have resisted what Chelsea have been trying to do. Raheem Sterling, I don't think really wanted to leave until it was made clear to him that he wasn't going to play, and then he tried to find some options. Trevor Chalobah's a good option, a good case study here. He was left out of the Chelsea pre-season tour quite unexpectedly, and was training alone. came back. They still were putting him in this bomb squad, and that's part of the strategy here as well. As Craig says, some of these players might think, well, shall I sit this out for 3, 4, 5 months, 6 months maybe? Who knows? The manager might get sacked. Someone else might come in and he might like me. And meanwhile, I'm getting paid and I can tick over. But Trevor Chalobah, waited and waited and waited, and they ended up sort of shunting him out on loan to Crystal Palace because he wanted to stay in London, and they couldn't find a permanent move for him. So they are going to have difficulties in trying to move some of these players on, but it's where the rubber meets the road to some extent. In that it's where on the balance sheet and from a numerical point of view, it makes sense. But then you've got to deal with the human being and the football side of it. And the reality is that creating this bomb squad and this group of 15, 16 players who train away from the first team, and the manager saying, no, that's it, nothing to do with me. You go, you go, you go. They're not all going to leave. You're not always going to get a deal over the line to sort those players out. And when you've got players who are irritated, who feel disconnected, who are not playing, they become a problem, even if they're on 60 grand a week or, they're not considered part of the first team. So it is high risk. And, we've never quite seen it to this extent before on this scale. It's where they've got to balance the financial sort of logic of it with the human and football reality that they now are a part of.
No, of course, a lot of these